everyone, and welcome to our session on nature-based solutions for adaptation of landscapes and cities to climate change. My name is Bedashruti Sadhu Khan, and I lead the sustainability management team of ICLEI South Asia. ICLEI is the world's largest leading association of local governments, and we work with city governments on different issues, climate and sustainable development, and various urban issues, including urban biodiversity. We are also the Asia coordinator for the Climate and Development Knowledge Network program, the CDKN program, that is being conducted with the support of IDRC Canada and the Royal Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And today's session is also being supported through this program. So I will not preach to the converted to stress on how nature-based solutions can play a role in climate adaptation and urban and community resilience, but I will tell you straight away what we will be discussing in today's session. Today we will try to focus on a few main questions. We will be talking about how nature-based solutions can help in reducing the trade-offs between development and environmental conservation, how it can support resilience in landscapes and cities, and how it can actually help local governments to build back better. What role do local governments and communities play in adopting and promoting NBS? How do we scale up? What are the potential policy and institutional approaches that could be explored for mainstreaming nature-based solutions for climate resilient infrastructure? So these are some of the questions that we will be focusing in today's session. And to do this, we have with us a very distinguished panel of speakers. But before I introduce them, I would like to request all the participants to please freely use the chat function. And I hope that the Menti link has been shared already in your chat box. If possible, please respond to that. I'd request all the participants to please respond to the Menti questions that we have prepared for you. It is a very simple question, basically, to get to know a little bit about who you are. And we would want you to address any questions that you might have for the speakers. As you hear them, please put them in the chat box, and we will try to take up all the questions at the end of all the presentations in our Q&A session. Also, I'd like to request all the speakers to please restrict your initial inputs to 10 to 12 minutes so that we can have some time for Q&A as well later on. And with this, I would like to straight away introduce our first speaker, my colleague, Dr. Mona Lisa Sen. She is the program coordinator for biodiversity in ICLEI South Asia, and she has been working for over 20 years in the field of biodiversity conservation and restoration ecology. She has immense experience on working on biodiversity conservation in the Eastern Himalayas, a global biodiversity hotspot. And she has been supporting several Indian cities in developing their local biodiversity strategy and action plans. Dr. Said, the floor is yours. You may please begin.
Thank you so much. Can I have the presentation? Good afternoon, everyone. What I'll focus on today is just to give a basic idea about what is nature-based solution, how are they defined, and the categories of the same as per the IUCN definition, because that's what is being followed globally throughout now. But in saying this, I'd like to add there are other definitions as well, which it's not that they are disregarded, but the IUCN one is most popularly followed. Pratibha, the next slide. So basically, nature-based solutions, just as the name suggests, it's using nature for the betterment of nature. So it's a very simple terminology, but IUCN defines it as taking actions which protect and sustainably manage as well as restore or modify ecosystems that will help to address societal challenges as well as provide benefits to human well-being and have biodiversity benefits also associated. So in a nutshell, it's basically taking the support of nature to bring in societal benefits, human benefits, as well as biodiversity benefits to any ecosystem. And the major focus here remains on using nature to restore or reinstate a degraded area. like I said, it provides sustainable solutions to communities and as well as vulnerable areas, and is one of the major tools now being used to address climate change. Coming to the approaches, as per IUCN, there are 5 approaches. First one is the ecosystem restoration approach, which covers topics like ecosystem restoration, ecological engineering, as well as forest landscape restoration. The second one, issue-specific ecosystem-related approaches. This one covers the ecosystem-based adaptation, ecosystem-based mitigation, as well as the ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. Infrastructure-related approaches, this focuses on use of natural infrastructure and green infrastructure approaches. Ecosystem-based management approach, this majorly focuses on water and its integration into biodiversity conservation. So this focuses on things like integrated coastal zone management and integrated water resource management. The ecosystem protection approach, this is basically concentrated on protected areas and using an area-based conservation model to improve protection in any of the protected areas in any city or any space in the globe. Next, please. So what I just explained, this is, we've just adapted one of the IUCN diagrams. So if you see, the 5 approaches are listed above, and this brings about a lot of societal changes by addressing the challenges of like temperature rise, water scarcity, degradation, flooding, etc. And then it just helps in human well-being and provides a lot of biodiversity benefits. Next slide. Coming to what basically is ecosystem restoration approaches, like I said, it covers ecological restoration, ecological engineering, and forest landscape restoration. Basically, ecological restoration is restoring any degraded ecosystem back to its normal conditions. Some of the prominent examples, these ones I've picked just from Delhi, but they are like restoring degraded mines and a Solabhatti Wildlife Sanctuary, or development of the biodiversity parks in Delhi. Ecological engineering, this is the design of sustainable ecosystems that integrate human society with nature for benefit of both. Some of these things include the constructed wetlands in Nepal or the ones in New Delhi. Forest landscape restoration, as the terminology suggests, this is basically to restore back a forest area to its ecological integrity. And this also helps in human well-being, because a lot of forest dwelling communities rely on these forests. Some of the prominent examples, first one is from India. This is in Auroville Township, where they have done tropical forest restoration. There's another very good example from Nepal in the Jhapa region, where the Terai forest restoration has been taken up. Next slide. This is just an example of one of the biodiversity parks in Delhi. This is a Yamuna Biodiversity Park spread over 1400 square kilometers. When the park was work was initiated, this was just a degraded river ecosystem. And now, through assisted regeneration, phytoremediation, and development of wetlands and simulating natural water bodies, the area has improved to now it supports pristine river flood, the floodplain vegetation of the Yamuna. And of course, it also has helped to improve the urban air, the health. It has provided immense livelihood opportunities to the community living around. It has become a habitat for wildlife to the extent that a leopard had walked into this territory and stayed there for 5 days before it was removed out by the forest department. It's a very good carbon sink and area for recharge and retention of stormwater. And if you see the numbers, you will see the immense rise in the number of species of each of the taxa. This is over a period of 18 years, and it's in the heart of a city in New Delhi itself. This is one of the prominent examples of ecological restoration. This was implemented by Delhi Development Authority in collaboration with the University of Delhi. Coming to the next one, the issue-specific ecosystem-related approaches, ecosystem-based adaptation, like the name suggests, it's the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services to help people adapt to the effects of climate change. Some of the prominent examples remain the floating agriculture, which is done in Borishal in Bangladesh, or the rooftop farming, which is practiced extensively in Kathmandu in Nepal. Ecosystem-based mitigation, again, this is to avoid or enhance biodiversity to negate the impacts of GHG reduction. So the community mangrove restoration in Cuddalore in India is one of the very significant examples under this approach. Disaster risk reduction basically use nature-based solutions to reduce disasters. Hatib Chil in Dhaka, or the work done by Gorakhpur Environmental Action Group in Gorakhpur on peri-urban agriculture are examples under this category. Climate adaptation services, these provide benefits to people from increased social ability to respond to change. And one of the very significant and world-known example for this is the Adaptive Delta Management Plan of Bangladesh. Next slide. This is the Gorakhpur example that I was just talking of. Basically, through an integrated agricultural system which they built up, they have been able to support and promote maintenance of open spaces in the form of peri-urban agriculture, which helps in climate resilience in the city because these act as sinks during floods. And this has also led to the open lands and water bodies, as well as peri-urban agriculture and pasture lands to be conserved. And the figures, of course, show a lot of people have got directly benefited as well from it. So it has had both societal as well as ecological benefits. Next slide. Infrastructure related approaches. This consists of two things, the natural infrastructure and the green infrastructure. Natural infrastructure is basically just using natural lands and natural areas to conserve and protect ecosystem values and functions which an area is providing. Things like one of the very popular techniques nowadays to promote urban forests is the Miyawaki technique. What I've listed here is an example from Mumbai, but Miyawaki forests are being developed in several cities across the globe. Another example is mangrove conservation in Pirojsha Nagar. Again, this is closer to Mumbai in India. Green infrastructure, the only difference here which comes here is that it also includes natural as well as semi-natural areas, and it includes some amount of grey infrastructure as well, which comes into it. So construction of the Bagmati River Nature Park or the construction of pocket parks in Lalitpur, these are both examples from Nepal, are prominent examples under the green infrastructure category. Coming to the next slide. So this is the Pirojsha Nagar mangroves that I was talking of. This is something which has been done by one of the leading corporates in India, the Godrej Group. They have, through active research, conservation, awareness, been able to develop over 1,000 square kilometers of pristine mangrove forest in a completely degraded area, and they are now maintaining this along with the local community. This was done as part of their corporate social responsibility activities. One slide back here. Ecosystem-based management approaches, like I'd explained, this focuses more on water management. So integrated coastal zone management to protect the coastal zones, like the Thane Mangrove Creek restoration work, or the work that has been done in Bangladesh on community-based sustainable management in Sunamganj. And the integrated water resource management, this is basically to coordinate and use of water for social well-being in an equitable manner. Some of the examples remain spring revival that has been taken up in Dhulikhel in Nepal. Another example is the Neknampur restoration in Hyderabad in India. Next slide. So this is the Neknampur lake. This was totally degraded, encroached upon, and techniques like biological treatment, plantation, desilting, organic manure production, and using a methodology of floating treatment wetlands. The lake has now been restored and it has enhanced the biodiversity of the area, is providing a lot of improved water to the area. The dissolved oxygen levels have improved, as well as it has improved the recreational value of the area, and the number of species which have been recorded have also gone up over time. This is basically an individual based work that had been taken up in Neknampur by a very small organization in the city. Next slide. Ecosystem protection approaches. Basically, this promotes protection of any forms of protected areas, or even the OECM areas or the other effective area-based conservation measures, which is the newer terminology which has come up for adding more protection to other areas which do not qualify as protected areas. Some of the very celebrated examples here include the Jabarkhet Nature Reserve in India, the Sai National Park again in India, and the Lumbini Crane Sanctuary in Lumbini, Nepal. Next slide. So Jabarkhet, this is basically one of the private forests in India. This was a totally degraded area which they have worked on to restore, and this overgrazing, lopping, poaching, deforestation, all this used to happen in this area over a period of extensive work of 5 years. They've now brought it back to the pristine vegetation in the area, to the extent that wildlife now comes there and even breeds, not just uses it as a corridor. So this has provided on one side ecosystem restoration. On the other side, it has provided increased livelihood opportunities for the local community who are now engaged there in various kind of activities, and also as nature guides. One of them, in fact, got a global award recently as one of the best nature guides in the country. This is also basically an individual initiative, and this was not actually taken up by the owner of the property. He just agreed to the concept, but the work was done by someone else who's not really the owner of the property, but used to go there during her childhood and found the scenario very depressing when she went later, and that's how she took this initiative up. The next slide. So basically, this is what I wanted to mention about what is nature-based solutions, and giving you a glimpse of the different kinds of work which is happening primarily in South Asia. And what I have shown here are just examples, and the work is not limited to this. There is a lot happening in the sphere of nature-based solutions, and cities are slowly picking up these examples and piloting them on their own, and also taking them up to a upscaling level. Thank you, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Mona Lisa. I think it was a very nice and thorough introduction to the NBS concepts, and thanks for highlighting these examples. I think they were really good to see. Our next speaker is Mr. Sunil Acharya. He is the Regional Advisor for Climate and Resilience in Practical Action, Nepal, and he has a special focus on South Asia and least developed countries. He's based in Nepal, and he leads the work on climate and disaster resilience and provides technical advice on this topic as well. He has over 12 years of experience on research, policy analysis, and practice of climate change adaptation, working with government officials, policymakers. He works on disaster risk reduction, climate finance and governance, international climate change negotiations, and several other aspects. Mr. Acharya, you may please begin.
Thank you. I'm Sunil Acharya, the Regional Advisor for Climate and Resilience in Practical Action. Practical Action is an international development organization working to develop ingenious solutions so that people in poverty can change their world. So today in my presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the initiatives that Practical Action has taken on the climate and resilience front, with particular focus on nature-based solutions. And also that in the urban context. So as we all know that to deal with climate change at the global stage, the focus should be primarily on the urban centers, because cities and towns are the ones who are impacted mostly by climate change, but also are the causes for the change that is happening. So recently, Practical Action commissioned a study in Bangladesh, Kenya, and in India, looking into what are the differential impacts that the residents of informal settlements and people working in informal economy face due to climate change. As you all know, that the projected changes because of climate change are several, but the impacts that these residents of informal settlements and people working in informal economy face are stark. For example, since the way the people in the informal settlements live, they face several impacts that are not faced by the wealthier residents in cities. The impacts result from three different causes of these changes in the climate. The simple extreme changes, which include the change in temperature and change in precipitation, etc., that results in the people having difficulty living within their houses and surroundings. The second relates to the complex extremes compounded by different factors of climate change, which leads to food insecurity, lack of access to food, also because of price rises, and also the affordability issue, and also the fact that they are already low income. And the third category of impacts led to changes in the mean, the water availability, the sea level rise, and also the average temperature, because these people in the informal settlements already live in constrained environment. They lack sufficient access to water, they lack sufficient access to sanitation, and all others, required critical services. So where do nature-based solutions come into play to deal with these impacts? So from practical actions own experience, and also from the global evidence that is being generated, we see that nature-based solutions in cities can be cost-effective approaches that provide multiple benefits that relates to resilience, that relates to healthier lives of populations, that relates to sustainable economies and green jobs. Basically, if you look into some of those examples, the nature-based solutions can result in avoided losses and damages resulting from climate change impacts and building resilience. There are several economic benefits. The fact that the NBSs have the potential to generate green jobs, and also social and environmental benefits due to reduced pollution and all other health benefits. And more importantly, the nature-based solutions are can generate value for money, because these are always the cost effective and generally involve low cost in developing, designing, and deploying these solutions. Having said that, there are several bottlenecks in terms of governance and policy, because we still yet to see the local governments and even the national governments prioritize nature-based solutions to the extent desirable. The investment priorities are still not geared towards promoting nature-based solutions, and then there are the gaps and constraints related to knowledge and capacity, because these will require tailored, knowledge management needs and capacity requirements. Nonetheless, in practical action, we came up with the approach to deal with these constraints, and to use that for strengthening climate resilience, which can broadly be also used in nature-based solutions perspective. So we see three overarching categories to deal with the existing constraints to strengthen urban resilience. The first deals with cross-cutting factors, which relate to, because we still know that climate change brings a lot of uncertainty, and we are yet to understand how it plays out, because we know that climate change will bring multiple interacting disturbances to cities and people living in there. Similarly, there are policies, there are practices happening to some extent, but we need them to be operationalized, because oftentimes in our context in South Asia and also in several developing countries, policies are formulated, but investment required to operationalize them, the mechanisms required to operationalize them are not put in place. So we need to deal with that. And also the issue of equity and inclusion is oftentimes, is raised in discussions, but putting that into practice is still a long way to go. The second category deals with creating the enabling environment. We still need to strengthen capacities, potentially facilitated by peer learning exercises, exchanges, and trainings. Similarly, we need to engage broader set of stakeholders, because in this particular area of building climate resilience in cities and also on nature-based solutions, we see that limited stakeholders are basically driving the agenda. So we need the participation of broader stakeholders. Similarly, the financing that comes to implement these solutions is still traditional, coming from donor-based projects, and but there are potentials to raise funding from innovative sources, for example, from private sector participation. And increasingly, we've been seeing that the regulations and tax reforms and bonds, etc., green bonds coming into picture, but we've not seen them, going into practice, at least to the scale required. Then a third and most important one, we need to look into what action areas we can focus on. The first one is how we can, because in developing countries, and particularly in the context of South Asia, we've seen that the focus of local governments particularly has been, and even national government has been, on infrastructure development, which is a need, but there is a space to influence that so that the local infrastructure development or whatever planned development happens is inclusive and is resilient. Similarly, we need to look and factor into the importance of locally led action, because we've seen that in cities, as I in the beginning talked about the informal settlements, people living in those areas are oftentimes excluded from decision making, and we are looking into real participation and the influence in decision making, not only just presence in the room. So, and then we also see that there is a critical need to develop and deploy best climate data, because with all these uncertainties, we've got global scaled projections and impact data, but when you go into a downscale community specific, locality specific data, there is a lot of gaps. So we need to be developing and deployed such data so that we can design effective solutions. So coming into some of the practical examples from the field that Practical Action has been practicing. Last year, we came up with an analytical framework for scaling up ingenious solutions. That's what we call, but this can equally be applied to eco-solutions and nature-based solutions. Since Practical Action has been working on, working together with the communities to implement ingenious solutions in the areas of climate change, on disaster risk reduction, on agriculture, and on urban sphere, we thought, why not look back into what we've been doing and try to improve so that it becomes more effective. Then we came up with a 5-stage, 10-step approach, which looks into what are the what is the solutions that we are trying to implement, and what are the critical factors we need to look into, including the participation of community in decision making, and looking into the cost and benefits of the specific solutions. This can equally be applied to any new technology or an approach or a solution that agencies and organizations want to deploy. So just we've been using this since last year, so that our focus is much more on scaling up the existing solutions, which is a critical need, because we've seen several examples of effective solutions, but they tend to be remained in specific areas and locations due to the lack of the force for scaling up. Then also, I just wanted to share some of the examples we've been working in here in Nepal, where I'm based. So basically in the western Nepal, in the lower Karnali river basin, we've been working with communities so that they can negotiate with the local government to implement nature-based solutions. And some of these pictures, as you can see, are related to reducing the impacts of flooding, which is a critical issue in that area. So these range from deployment of biodikes instead of gray concrete dikes, to reduce flood risk, and also for the restoration of degraded land. The communities have been successful in implementing some of the other solutions, such as local flood management of the degraded land, restoring wetlands, and also restoring and protecting the forest and pasture in the catchments through the support of the local government. So how they do it is they prioritize their needs based on the resilience framework that Practical Action applies, and then they go on to negotiate with the local government, so showcasing the fact that these are the community needs coming out from a structured process. So the local government are convinced to make investments. So that's the example we've been working on. So with this, I'll stop, but very happy to take any question people might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your inputs. I think the practical examples were really nice, and I appreciate you taking the time to present this really simple framework for taking action and for scaling up NBS. I understand you may have to leave early, so I'd just like to take a moment to request participants, if you have any questions for the speaker, please put it in your chat box so that we can ask him to address the questions as soon as possible. And maybe if we can get these questions, Mr. Acharya, if you could just respond online, then it's easier for us to transfer in case you have to leave. Otherwise, if you're welcome to stay, of course.
I have some time to stay.
Okay, great. Our next speaker is Ms. Jaya Dindo. She is the Director of Integrated Urban Planning in WRI, India, and she provides strategic leadership to all urban planning initiatives across India in WRI to advance the goals for sustainable development. She has over 13 years of global experience within the domain of sustainable urban planning. Prior to WRI, she was also the lead urban planner with the Center for Infrastructure, Sustainable Transportation and Urban Planning at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Ms. Dindo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shruti. And if you could please confirm if you can see my screen, okay?
Yes, we can see.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this very important and topic which is sort of regaining huge prominence in India and just everywhere. So basically, I'll just start with setting some context of why this is important. And, although Mona Lisa has presented very nicely what, nature-based solutions entail, why they're important and, how they're being applied, but just from an urban context of cities, especially, why these are important and why they need to be scaled and applied to the context of cities and urban areas in India, especially. So just to set that tone. In India, when we look at, most of our major cities and look at where urbanization has happened, these maps basically show you that, all the built up which has been added after a certain time period. So after 2015, that's all the red and the orange, and this is happening outside the municipal boundary. So what that means is that it is messy because it is unplanned for the most part. It is eating away into the natural infrastructure which exists around cities and urban areas. And it is also hidden because the amount of growth that is happening here is typically not accounted for when you're looking at city services, for example. Just trying to. And basically, where are we building? When we look at where we are building in cities, this is the case of Bangalore. 85% of the blue-green infrastructure in Bangalore is encroached upon by built-up area. So what that leads to, and what you can see here in the picture is 1984 when there was a drain, and 2016 where it's all been built up. And this is the kind of situation you land into with very little rain actually in Bangalore. And this is consistent across all cities, right? So Chennai floods, for example, the 2015 floods were one of the floods in India which had the highest economic loss, and the death toll was really high and it displaced a lot of people. Similarly, we have this sort of dichotomous situation in cities where on one hand you have floods and rains, and then you also have water shortages. And India, ironically, it basically ranks amongst the most water-stressed countries in the world. And a lot of people in India are getting displaced due to just climate change, water shortages and things of that nature. There's also the question of deteriorating air quality in cities and urban areas. So air pollution, and a lot of people, a lot of children dying, a lot of people breathing air which is essentially toxic in Indian cities. And some of our cities are infamously on the top 10 charts all the time when it comes to air quality. And when we look at who this is impacting, there are differential vulnerabilities that people experience. So this is a mapping that we had done in Mumbai, and we had looked at Dharavi and its immediate sort of neighboring community Matunga in the month of October. And the difference in temperature between these two communities, Dharavi is one of the largest informal settlements in India, is about 5 degrees, which that's just a huge amount of disparity between low-income communities and just communities which are next door, but which have the means and therefore, probably green infrastructure, etc. So basically, the urban poor are at the forefront of this climate crisis that is unfolding, that we are experiencing. And basically, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be pushed into poverty in the next coming couple of decades just from climate change. The other worrying statistic is the amount of public resources that cities have, to deal with, to provide infrastructure, to provide amenities to their citizens. And Indian cities, if you look at this, they have some of the least per capita public resources, which means we are operating in a financial sort of a crunch situation, and therefore need to figure out what is a good solution, what will work, not just from the standpoint of the environmental concerns and the ecological concerns, but what will also work from a cost effectiveness standpoint. The good opportunity here is that 75% of India's 2050 infrastructure is yet to be built. And what that translates to in terms of cities is that about 35 billion square meters of new built up is going to be added in Indian cities, just in terms of real estate. And how we add that built up, for example, will make a huge change in terms of how we are walking into the climate change situation. Now, the case for NBS has been already made very well, both by my previous speakers, Monalisa and Sunil. So just to say that the three central challenges that the Anthropocene faces today is basically adapting and mitigating to climate change. The second is how do we protect biodiversity, and the third is how do we ensure human well-being by doing all this. And nature-based solutions, like we mentioned, are cost-effective, and at the same time they deliver multiple benefits to people and the planet. The good thing about these solutions is also that they're available at scale, especially in the urban context. So you can do it at the plot level, at the household level, at the neighborhood level, at the city level. There are many ways to approach this. And just overall, in terms of where India stands now, with its policy, investments, and all of that. I mean, one, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is recognizing the need of proliferating this in the urban context. So they've talked about 200 urban forests across India. There's also the 15th Finance Commission, which is committing, fiscal transfers and incentivizing states which have larger forest cover. And there are also cities which are developing blue-green master plans. For example, Delhi, the recent Delhi draft master plan is talking about it, and there are policies which are sort of looking to advance this agenda. And the kind of action that is happening on the ground, again, these cases, there were many examples that were demonstrated, but they're both on both sides. There's government-led action, which is happening at a certain scale. There's also community-led action, which is happening at the local ground, sort of ground root level. Now, WRI's strategy, in terms of building resilience in cities, the cities program is concerned about how do you bring nature-based solution to cities, how do you help cities identify interventions, how do you help them scale interventions, and how do you bring the community and the different stakeholders along towards co-creating these solutions so that they are sustained over a long period of time. There is a platform called the Cities for Forest. It's basically a platform which was co-designed and co-formulated with WRI, with pilot projects in the Revolve group. And essentially the idea is bringing cities on globally who are committing to climate change action by conserving inner, nearby, and faraway forests. And in India, Kochi was the first signatory to this platform that has been followed by Hyderabad and Mumbai as well. And I'll just, in the next 5 minutes, I'll just talk about, what WRI has therefore been doing in Kochi. Now, our approach in Kochi has been, a couple-fold. So basically, when you look at you break down the nature-based solution, you're looking on the one hand at urban flood and water management in urban areas, and on the other hand at urban green cover and biodiversity. And this is the case for Kochi, for any city in India that you take, because they're all ravaged by floods, there's pollution, there's all the concerns that I showed earlier. And there are two things that we need to address, both adaptation and mitigation, especially because adaptation action and the amount of funding and financing that's going towards adaptation is really meager when you compare it with mitigation. So the point is, how do you look at both together? And the approach that WRI has used is three-pronged, essentially. Looking at how do you drive data-driven decision-making, because you can't manage what you can't measure. The second is engaging with key stakeholders and building their capacities, and also the capacities of the communities that you're working with. And the third is integrating NBS and existing institutional structures and building a roadmap for resilience for the city in a way that it is institutionalized, whether it's your master plan, development plan, your disaster management plan, how do you bring these elements in so they're all speaking to each other and they're in harmony. So we started by doing some mapping of, what does the heat risk, for example, in Kochi look like? What does the flood risk look like? And this is the kind of, outputs we got. So about 31% of the city's population is exposed to a temperature about 30 degrees Celsius. And why that is important is because beyond a certain temperature threshold, the productivity of people goes down, and it impacts their, livelihoods. It impacts economic, reasons and things of that nature. The second one is about, the amount of people who live within floodplains in Kochi, and that's about a fourth of the city is what we saw. The other thing that we did is identifying communities which are at risk. So from those maps, looking at the hotspots, the areas where, most either flooding would happen or the most heat risk exposure is there. Looking at communities which are next to water bodies, so therefore they are, exposed to sea erosion attack, or, they're adjacent to lakes and sea level rise and things of that nature. And basically, we were looking at assessing individual and community resilience. And the reason for that is this, because the resilience is dependent on three factors. It's your exposure, it's your sensitivity. So basically, the best local knowledge comes in from, the local people. So what is your sensitivity? And then your adaptive capacity, because any chain is as strong as its weakest link. So you have to look at the most vulnerable communities if you're going to design actions around resilience in the city. So first, the action that we've taken is looked at tree-based intervention. So where can we look at restoration potential? How can we identify restoration potential in the city and then create tree-based interventions? Where can trees be planted? And of course, it's very important to make sure that you're getting the species right and you're getting, the kind of adaptation that you're proposing right, because otherwise there's a risk of maladaptation if you're looking at monoculture or the wrong species, etc. And the idea was also that in urban areas, you're not only looking at, like large swaths of forest where you can just go plant, you're looking for opportunities where you can kind of do this microsurgery and these, kind of acupuncturist approaches where you're looking at block planting, waterways planting, perimeter planting around institutional areas, and so on. The second thing that we were looking at, and what then we did through the Urban Community Resilience Assessment tool, which we have developed, is look at, at the city level, what are some of the risks, at the neighborhood level, what is the kind of resilience capacity that is existing, and at the household level, what kind of awareness is there, and in terms of, their access to information and communication. We did 4 neighborhoods in Kochi, 4 vulnerable neighborhoods, and the thing that was identified consistently as being of highest priority was flood prevention infrastructure, for example. And broadly, the recommendations were threefold, right? So when it came to resilience, one was that grassroots level action is needed to strengthen social cohesion, because the number of people or the number of communities, number of institutions you're in touch with increases your resilience capacity. The second is policy interventions for people-centric governance. How do you bring in people and get their local knowledge into the local discourse and, designing and co-designing solutions with them? And the third was community-level infrastructure, development for disaster resilience. So one is on the flooding side, but also on the water and sanitation side of things. And these are some of the kind of workshops that we've held, looking at people-centric decision-making, building the capacity of different people and stakeholder engagements. And what we are doing is basically developing a guidance document for the city disaster management plan, which is a way to institutionalize nature-based solutions in the city, and basically looking at disaster management plans from a whole new lens. Typically, disaster management plan in cities look at rescue and recovery. And our framework basically proposes that it looks at a more preparedness angle. So it looks at the more long-term sort of resilient, city resilient and preparedness plan for the city. And the hope is that the outcomes of this document, this will inform the city disaster management plan for Kochi. So it will basically help in the preparedness, not just in the rescue and recovery efforts for when a climate disaster happens, especially for vulnerable communities. We are looking at increasing green cover, improving social cohesion, especially inclusion, to access to public spaces and things of that nature, and improved quality of life for the entire city. And essentially, the point is that, in order to build a resilient city, in order to build resilient Kochi, and to bring in nature-based solution, all 4 actors, public, private, academia, the CSOs, NGOs, and citizens have to come together, because there are collective strengths that they bring, which we need to leverage, so that these solutions can not only be put in the city, not only be implemented, but they have sustenance and they can be scaled. And so I'll stop here, Shruti, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. I think, I mean, it's a brilliant presentation. Thanks for also highlighting the bottom-up approach. I think the need for bottom-up approach was quite nicely highlighted. Thanks for highlighting this thing for successful interventions. Our next speaker is Ms. Anu Kumari Lama. She's a tourism specialist in International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ECMOD in Nepal. ECMOD is quite well known, I think, rather than the full form. She has over 20 years of experience of working in the fields of sustainable tourism development, value chain, resilient entrepreneurship, climate action and governance at policy, practice and science interface. She is currently engaged in promotion of natural and cultural heritage and community-based tourism development in China, India, Bhutan, Pakistan, Nepal, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, piloting several climate resilient tourism initiatives. She also serves as a faculty member of the Himalayan University Consortium Academy. Ms. Lama, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, yes. A very good afternoon. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the ICLE South Asia for giving us the opportunity to present our case. My name is Anu Lama. As the moderator has already mentioned, I work at ECMOD. It's quite fascinating to listen to previous speakers who are really bringing the perspective from the very much city and urban centric. So, but I would like to take you to a bit high up in the mountains. Not to say that we don't have any relationship with the cities, because we live in the upstream, so you are in the downstream. So I think it's good to have a whole-rounded understanding of what nature-based solution means for our mountain people. And because I would like to bring in the perspective of building a climate resilient tourism entrepreneurship as the kind of an entry point to really understand the concept of nature-based solutions. So this is, and also just to inform the participants as well as the speakers here, is that this whole presentation is built around the narrative by taking into consideration the guiding questions, right? So I am structured in that way. So just to give the context, I am glad that, Dr. Sen and also Jayaji has already touched upon the idea of nature-based solutions, but I think there is a way of really which angle you are, looking at, and what sector you are representing, and whether it's the landscape you are representing. And because of the nature that I'm focusing primarily in tourism, I thought it's also good to really, try to present what is our understanding of nature-based solutions, just to help contextualize the matter, because, I might be a bit off from what the previous speakers have already mentioned. So, so having said that, so definitely my focus is really, the title is on NBS for adaptation of landscape and cities, but the place I'm coming from would be from the landscape and communities. So when we talk about the landscape, the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, it is one of the largest mountain systems covering around 4 million square kilometers. And also this whole boundary is shared by 8 regional member countries, starting from Afghanistan all the way to Pakistan. So the landscape in itself is quite a rich. We are on top of the world, so whatever happens, whether it's climate change, or the resource scarcity, and the dependency of people, especially the livelihoods, such as tourism, is quite an important issue for us. And that's why we say the Hindu Kush Himalayan is the pulse of the planet, because it supports half of the humanity, inclusive of the people living in the upstream as well as downstream. So this landscape perspective and the reliance of communities is very important for us to understand why we should, what perspective are we taking in today's presentations when I am talking about the nature-based solution for climate resilient tourism entrepreneurship. So because of the geographical location, the specificity, our economic, marginalization, resilience matters for us, and primarily now because of the global sort of challenges that is really emanating from climate shocks. Particularly for a sector that we are talking about is from tourism. So it's been well accepted. Our region is warming, and there are a lot of drastic signature events are also in terms of extreme events. So this is all understandable. But now what matters now is how do we really address this compounded risks now that is being posed by changing climate, especially the livelihoods of the mountain communities. Because this has got a very far-reaching consequences, especially the tourism businesses and the communities that operates in our landscape. So I think the whole concept of now nature-based solution, it's gaining momentum, but also the momentum in regards to, how do we conceptualize the idea of resilience when nature-based tourism should serve as an entry point or as a driver, right? So we do need to come up with a significant shift in the way we conceptualize or design what tourism enterprises are. So that radical departure from the existing way that tourism businesses are designed needs to be very much looked from a transformation perspective. So, and this is the area where we are testing out the whole concept of resilient entrepreneurship from the perspective of building the resilience of tourism stakeholders, especially business owners, against climate risks. So let me just again, how I see the nature-based solution as and how it fits with the concept of climate resilience is that this has been expressed earlier also, but if you look at it, the whole idea of understanding the value of nature-based solutions really departed from nature-centric with a progression of adding social and economic dimensions. And then the third point is very much on synergies, right? There is a very dynamic interrelationship between nature, society, and economy. So in that sense, the concept of nature-based solution is also does require us or call us to be more, looking from a dynamic and complex, interrelationship perspective. So that makes the whole approach of solution even more challenging and interesting, and that's why there is a radical departure, when we are conceptualizing the resilience of a tourism business from a nature-based solutions. And what I would like to also now, this is the thesis that I'm proposing, right? So taking the understanding of what nature-based solution is, departing from the nature-centric to socio-economic well-being to the synergy, in our understanding, it all overlaps with the kind of climate resilient tourism entrepreneurship concept we are proposing, and I'm going to explain why, right? So here, the idea of, so the pretext here is that mountains are vulnerable, and so is our livelihood, especially tourism, and our entrepreneurs are impacted by its different shocks. So if you want to build the resilience, right? So resilience is defined as those enterprises that are able to absorb, adapt, or transform their total value proposition. So when I say the total value proposition, we are already bringing the interrelation, the dynamic and interrelated relationship between environmental, social, and economic. That synergy is already clearly spelled out, and this is something that really makes climate resilient as an innovative concept. But it's not only in relation to how the businesses are able to adapt, adjust, and transform, but their ability to really become resilient is also affected by the strategic orientation of individual entrepreneurs, right? So when we say strategic orientation, there are 3-4 different elements that we are looking at. One is the entrepreneurial orientation, right? The whole capability of individual entrepreneur to be able to innovate their business, diversify the product. A market orientation, like are they able to improve the productivity, improve the production of the business, the services, business expansion. So there is the whole aspects of AAT, that is absorption, adaptations, and transformation. There is the strategic oriented aspects also, so which is very much linked with the capability of the individual entrepreneurs that determines. But in addition to it, the business as such does not operate in isolations. There are multiple, value chain actors, coming together to provide that service. So in that regard, the whole concept of climate resilient entrepreneurship not only rely on their ability to absorb, adapt, and transform, but it is also influenced by the strategic orientation and their ability to mobilize the networks and partnership, because there are different players in the entrepreneur, right from the government to financial institutions to there are different technological interventions. So from the very outset, what we are proposing here is that if we want to promote climate resilient tourism entrepreneurship, the approach should be quite integrative in its approach, and it's also very holistic. So taking that as an understanding, some of the elements that really qualifies, to what it calls as a climate resilient entrepreneurship is that it has to be ecologically sustainable. Tourism business, it's value-based as opposed to volume. And it dependent on clean energy solutions, contribution to GHG emission reduction, promotes resource efficient businesses and service operations. It's inclusive in its nature, involving different players of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It fosters sustainable business operations and growth. And last but not least, it provides access to and helps in securing green finance. So the whole understanding of what the climate resilient enterprise as a framework is a quite a significant departure from what we normally consider as a resilient enterprise. Now, number two, in regards to how does local government and community play an important role? Our previous speakers already mentioned the different sections of the society or stakeholders, similar in the context here also. The local government, communities, includes, like when I say community, there's an involvement of private sectors as well, and they are they really are critical in advancing this whole practical or pragmatic and political agendas of what resilient tourism enterprise is. And so it's important for tourism stakeholders. What happens on the ground, it really helps to boost or advocate for how it should be really communicated and where the actions are happening to contributing to scaling up the investment and enterprises to a regional and global platform. And that's why local government community play a critical role in advancing the climate actions on the ground. When we say climate action, in our case here now, building the climate resilience of tourism enterprise. In terms of policy and institutional approaches, so as we've already mentioned, HKH is the pulse of the planet. We are the most vulnerable parts of the world. So we do have regional priorities, which we call to actions, 6 urgent actions, and also 9 SDG consistent priorities. And so of the 9 consistent priorities, something the priorities that is very much linking with what we are proposing here as a climate resilient is on the priority number 7 and 8, which is about the priority number 7 and 8, it definitely talks about the sustainable adaptation to climate change and disaster risk reductions in the mountains through evidence-based decision making. And the 8 is building resilient, equitable, and inclusive mountain communities empowered by economic opportunity and investment in mountain infrastructure. Supporting this, we have also a global campaign called HKS to Glasgow, really trying to promote the ambitious climate actions, especially in the areas of resilient entrepreneurship and livelihoods also. So these are the established institutional policy from a regional and global perspective. But really coming back to, because the pilot that I'm going to present here as a case is from Nepal. So if you really then focus or narrow down in a national context, the government of Nepal envisioned really, promoting socioeconomic prosperity by building a climate resilient society. And in order for the government to achieve this, it is already developing a long-term policy for low greenhouse gas emissions development strategy. This is to really address or achieve net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050, and also really maintaining the 45% of total area of the country under forest cover. So these are the targets, and the government really takes this, climate actions at the mitigation and both also on the adaptation very aggressively and sincerely. So taking this whole understanding as a backdrop, the approach to build the resilient enterprise, especially the climate resilient tourism enterprise, is very holistic. It's integrative in its sense, and it's also transformative. So what we're doing is we're trying to build the climate resilient of tourism enterprise. That is again, that definition which I already mentioned. Those enterprises that are able to absorb and adapt or transform their total value proposition and strategic orientation, but they should also be able to mobilize networks, partnership among the different players of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now, how do we do it? So we are really promoting this as local actions on the ground through investment to take climate actions to build back better tourism, we are calling it. And this is really promoting this whole concept of green, inclusive, and resilient tourism. But how do we ensure that there is a scope in relation to is that we do have, if you look from when we say tourism business, so there is a supply and demand end. So when you look at the supply the demand end of the story, there are emerging opportunities to really promote this concept of nature-based solutions, primarily because this is the survey that we have done with the Nepal does receive a lot of tourists from India and China. These are major regional how do you say market. So we did do a research in understanding the scope for climate resilient tourism market. And so if you look at it, the findings suggest that 75% of the tourists are well aware of the renewable energy, institutional measures, utilization. So these are the the new demography, right? The techs where we the most educated and high-end mid or to middle income earning tourists. So the whole mindset of the tourist traveling, and it's encouraging for us to see that there is a market for this kind of products. So 56 of those tourists who are visiting are millennials, 22% are female, 45 are Indians. So my point here is that if you want to promote this idea of nature-based solutions for climate resilient, there is already an emerging market from a demand side. And from the supply side is the pilot what we are doing, right? So if there is a demand, then tourism, in order to build the resilience of climate tourism entrepreneurs, how do we ensure that the products and services that they are, relying upon and the business they are building are climate resilient? So this is why, by integrating the renewable energy and energy efficient solutions, we are trying to develop a sustainable business model that helps to address the total value proposition, taking into consideration their strategic orientation as well as their ability to network. So we have piloted an innovative, innovative approach under this whole the Tourism Innovation Hub. In short, we call it Tourism Hub. The whole purpose is that we want to enhance the resilience or build the resilience of tourism entrepreneurs impacted by climate change in Nepal through sustainable business solutions. And so this has two specific elements. So one part links with ideating, incubating, and accelerating the bankable business. That very much takes into consideration how their business is actually contributing to a total a value proposition at an environmental, social, and economic front. When we say social, it should be inclusive, it should create green jobs. And from an environmental perspective, the business should be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and from an economic, the return on investment, right? And then the second part is definitely mobilizing the networks among the different players of the ecosystem. So this is one of the example that I'm giving here, the Sanskriti Farm and Research Center. So this pilot, the Tourism Hub, when we initiated, we did a call for application from those tourism entrepreneurs who is interested and has already implemented or aware of the renewable energy technology and their contribution in as a solutions. And so we had 8 entrepreneurs who's engaged in this pilot work. So right from Annapurna, right from Dolpa to Annapurna, yes, and to Mid Hills and then to Kathmandu. So this one is from Kabri. one of the entrepreneurs who engaged in our pilot work. So these entrepreneurs were taken into this whole 18-month journey of building a sustainable business model. So they were engaged in starting from ideating the business, what they want to do, what is the vision for short-term and long-term, to how they want to really integrate the concept of the social, economic, and environmental value proposition within the business, and how they want to also come up with a business plan that has the potential to be accepted by banks to fund their business model. And so Sanskrit Farm and Research Center is one of the successful incubators whose business plan has been now accepted by one of the established financial institutions in Nepal to support their short-term and long-term goals in making their business resilient. So this and in addition to that, just to kickstart and motivate each entrepreneurs, also we have provided seed fund so that it will help them to really integrate the short-term goal of integrating renewable energy into their businesses. So this is the whole idea as to how the concept of very complex and dynamic climate resilient entrepreneurship is actually materialized and now being successfully implemented as a pilot in Nepal. So this is the first phase. Now this is my last slide. When you reflect it, yes, it's quite complex actually, because like I mentioned, the whole idea of building a resilience of an entrepreneurs is not only linked with the technical know-how, but there is that whole, there is the service dimension, there is that strategic orientation, the partnership. So it does recall for a very holistic approach. And so it has to move away from the traditional approach to mountain tourism enterprise. Second one is that the recovery, especially after climate shocks and also COVID, to build back better, can and is possible. So by developing a business model or a solution that support the green, inclusive, and resilient tourism through RE&E services, it is possible. And the example that I just provided does also give a very good indication that if your business model is robust and if it takes care into all the sustainability criteria, access to innovative financial solution is possible. Our case has already shown it. And last but not the least, through local actions on the ground, the whole purpose here is really you want to globalize the locally led climate actions for responsible recovery of tourism enterprise by leveraging the nature-based solutions concept. So with this, I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Lama, and thanks for linking the NBS with the entrepreneurship-based economy like tourism. I think that is interesting to observe. We are running out of time, so I'll move quickly to our last speaker from Bangladesh. He is Dr. Hasib Muhammad Irfanullah. He is an independent consultant on environment, climate change, and research systems, and visiting research fellow for the Center for Sustainable Development in the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. He has over 22 years of experience evolving from an algal taxonomist to an aquatic ecologist, from a conservationist to a development facilitator. He has a keen interest in understanding the nature-people knowledge nexus and has been associated with different national and international organizations, including IUCN, Practical Action, ICAD, British Council, and so on. Dr. Hasib.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shruti. It has been fascinating to listen to four presenters before me, how diverse our approaches are, but we also see some commonality, isn't it? So commonality in diversity. I will be talking about mostly Bangladesh. Thanks to Mona Lisa for mentioning so many examples from Bangladesh. I will be starting with three stories, very quick one, because to me, the story of nature-based solution in Bangladesh is a story of change. Let me start with coastal afforestation, where we create a green belt on our coast. Of course, you all know Bangladesh, which is a very flat country, unlike Nepal. So it's a huge drop from Nepal to Bangladesh. And coastal afforestation, it used to be just creating green belt. But if we look into over the last 13 years or so, it is not only the forest department is establishing or creating a forest, it is involving the community. So it has become community-based afforestation, community-based adaptation. So although we started coastal afforestation since in 1966, so we have 55 years of history, but it has changed. The second story is, which was mentioned by Mona Lisa, is the floating agriculture. It's a traditional practice in Bangladesh. It was always there, for 100, 200 years. But over the last 2 decades, it has become a story of ecosystem-based adaptation. So same thing, we can call it, we have reinvented our indigenous practice or indigenous knowledge. The third story is about ecosystem protection. We have been protecting our ecosystem, calling it a reserve forest, calling it something else in terms of protection. But now over the, I think, formally it started in 2003. We engaged people and we created a participatory protected area management, or we are calling it co-management. So you see, things have been changing over the last couple of decades when we talk about adapting to climate change impacts or practicing nature-based solutions. But what do we find from all these examples? Well, when we talk about mainstreaming nature-based solution in our policies, in our institutional approaches, which is one of the key points in today's discussion, we have been trying to communicate because we believe that communicating nature-based solution is quite important when you involve NGOs, when you involve local government, even the policymaker. So the idea is we are trying to communicate in Bangladesh, hey, we have been practicing nature-based solution for such a long time, literally hundreds of years. So it is, maybe the term is new, the framing is new, but not the approach. So we did some analysis of our short-term plan, 5-year plan, 20 years plan, like perspective plan of Bangladesh 2041, when Bangladesh wants to become a high-income country, or the other plan that Mona Lisa mentioned, Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. Analyzing all these short to long-term plans, we showed that ecosystem-based approaches have always been mentioned. So it is nothing new. Then what is new? New is we have to understand the framing. We know that there are so many different definitions of nature-based solutions, but we are also trying to promote like Mona Lisa. Sorry, I'm mentioning Mona Lisa's name again and again. It like there were no other presenters. But she identified IUCN definition, which is a very useful one. I'm a bit biased because I used to work for IUCN for a long time. But it shows that how you need to focus on not only human well-being, but also biodiversity benefit. That's the key part. If you miss one, it will not be nature-based solution. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to build the capacity of our government officers. And you will be really, and I'm also amazed that over the last year or so, many big disaster risk reduction training programs being organized by the government, they have now included at least one session on nature-based solution. It is a fantastic change. Why can I say that? Because I'm facilitating those sessions. I'm feeling so encouraged that capacity development part has been initiated. The next would be how to translate nature-based solution knowledge and the plans into actions. So we need to change the way we develop our projects. Biodiversity, ecosystem services, these are now appreciated in our government project planning documents as cross-cutting issue. So we are trying to harness that. Hey, nature-based solution is not mentioned there, but ecosystem services, biodiversity conservation is mentioned. You know, just think about it. And then we are often being asked, this is the third aspect, where is the evidence that nature-based solution works? It is cost effective. because you know that a country like Bangladesh, which is very much disaster prone, flood, cyclone, tidal surge, so we are kind of inclined to gray infrastructure. So the third approach that we are taking, that we are promoting, obviously, logically, that we should harness ecosystem services wherever we can. It is not like that we are promoting all the gray infrastructure should be replaced by green infrastructure. It is not a new green revolution. No, it is not. So we are promoting the idea of gray, green, blue. That mix is so important. But where's the evidence? That is a bit lacking. Many of our literature is gray literature. Sometimes it is being asked that, hey, you as a project manager, you have written it, so you are not kind of not that impartial when you report your own project success. Very recently, with the University of Oxford and a team from Bangladesh, we have been trying to analyze the academic literature on NBS in Bangladesh as well as gray literature. And we have come up with an understanding how effective nature-based solution is in Bangladesh. So when the paper is out, that would be a fantastic addition to our knowledge. And there is another work is going on harnessing the economic recovery need in Bangladesh at the moment, as well as in the world. How nature-based solution can show economic recovery potential. What are the challenges? So these are the new avenues that is happening. Now I'd like to finish it off with some urban example, but there are not that many. Once again, Mona Lisa has mentioned that in Dhaka we have Hatir Jheel, which is a $250 million project, a mix of gray and green. But the promising story is there is a new project is being designed by ADB, Asian Development Bank. They are finishing off another project which started in 2014, will be finishing next year. This is a kind of coastal town environment infrastructure project kind of a thing. But very interestingly, the second phase, they have explicitly mentioned nature-based solution component, and they will be doubling their working area. In the first phase, the current one, they are working in 10 coastal towns, but it will be 22. So, and they have already identified certain nature-based solutions, interventions that could be implemented in the new phase. So although we do not have many strong nature-based solution examples in urban areas, except some green parks, green spaces, and this and that, but I'm quite excited about those new opportunities, new capacities, and a new way of thinking nature-based solutions in Bangladesh. That's all from me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Haseeb. I think, thanks for highlighting the importance of traditional knowledge and how we can integrate it with new concepts. I will move on now because we are really running short of time. We have one question for Mr. Sunil Acharya from Petra, Nyland. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. You mentioned the problem of operationalizing existing adaptation plans and strategies. What, in your opinion, is needed to improve this situation? So if you could please elaborate on that, Mr. Acharya.
Thank you. That's a really important question. So to be brief, what I'd say is that oftentimes these plans and strategies at all levels, be it on the national level, be it on the subnational or local level, or at the sectoral level, are not tied up with investment strategy. So there is a critical need to tie up these plans with investment strategy, identify the funding sources as well as the implementing entities so that it can be taken forward. Secondly, oftentimes, again, the climate change adaptation activities are seen to be implemented through projects. So there is a tendency to wait for projects to implement these actions. So what I would suggest is these interventions identified through climate change adaptation plans or strategies should be mainstream within the government planning process, the regular government planning process, so that it's the central part of the government's climate action. Having said that, there is also a role of civil society, private sector, and the divergence of stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would just like to ask if any of the speakers have any questions to each other, because I don't see any questions from the participants anymore. And if anyone wants to ask a question to any other speaker, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I will move on, I think, to our closing, and I will hand over to my good friend and colleague, Dr. Shehnaz Musa from South North South Africa. Shehnaz, if you could give your closing remarks and close the session.
Thank you, Bedo Shruti. So I think I've got less than 5 minutes and then we're going to be kicked out of here. So all these pages of notes I'm going to have to give a miss. But just greetings, everyone. And I'd like to thank the 5 speakers. I was listening quite intently because I knew I had to do the closing. And for me, what was so brilliant is the thread that runs through all of this. It's the very practical angle to nature-based solutions. It's that it's always been around, but the word hasn't been there. So we need to look for the indigenous knowledge, harvest that, and celebrate that, and start calling it what it really is. And it is innovative, it is pushing the boundaries, and we need to acknowledge that and really celebrate that. I think for me, what was really nice is how these concepts that everybody's grappling with, from WRI to IUCN to practical action, but it's all grounded in very real examples. And I take a lot of comfort out of that, because as we're going into CARB, I often feel there's so much talking. So just seeing all these practical examples, real solutions coming out, and even then going into the tourism sector where Ms. Lama talked us through that. I think it really is heartening to see all this, and just to thank all of you that were listening, and the 5 speakers, and to you, Bedo Shruti, for coordinating the event and bringing it all together. So thank you, and I wish all of you well with the next 3 days of the Adaptation Futures. So back to you, Bedo Shruti.
Thank you, Shehnaz, and I think thank you once again to all the speakers and the participants for being part of this session. I hope we will keep in touch.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.